Anti-race! Anti-race!
I don't believe you can come to a negotiation and say, here, take it or leave it. I mean, that's just not the way it's done. I certainly have things that I want to see in the bill that, might be my internal red lines, but we have to see. But I mean, the bottom line is that we have to have transparency. We have to have accountability.
Good morning, I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Welcome to Washington Post Live and another in our series, Race in America. Exactly 1 year ago today, George Floyd was murdered under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer. A young woman named Darnella Frazier posted to Facebook the video she recorded and helped set off the largest demonstrations in our nation's history, not just here, but around the world. Today, we're examining where we are 1 year later. And a key piece of that discussion is the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. And a key person in the push to get that from legislation to law joins us this morning. She is Congresswoman Karen Bass of California. Congresswoman Bass, welcome back to Washington Post Live.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Jonathan.
Great to see you. So you are meeting with George Floyd's family today, later today. Your thoughts on this 1 year anniversary?
Well, it has been an incredible year, but even though we have not passed the bill yet, I'm very positive that we will. So much has happened this year, and I'm encouraged because I can't remember a time in my lifetime when so much discussion has happened around systemic racism, and there seems to be a new awareness and openness to examining our history, to examining the institutions of society, and for looking at where policing fits in there. And so overall, I'm very encouraged and hopeful of the future.
This is very interesting. I mean, you and I have known each other for a long time. You have been in this realm fighting for racial justice, social justice, equity. And so your feet are firmly planted on the ground. And yet I think, to my mind, hearing you say even a year later that you remain optimistic, and I can see it, I hear it in your voice and I can see it on your face, that you truly are optimistic about where things are going.
Yeah. Yes, I am. I mean, now that doesn't deny the fact that we have incredible struggles, but even those struggles, I think, are educational and illuminate the issues in our country. So, for example, on January 6th, to know that there were a number of people there who were open white supremacists, anti-Semitic, carrying the Confederate flag. And at the same time, you have people saying, we actually need to look at the history of our country and be more honest. And so I do understand that when change is underway, you have this turmoil, you have this conflict. But I think at the end of the day, our country is going to be so much better off when we're kind of past this period. And I think this period is going to take a while. And you and I know that in part, it is a reaction from 4 years of having a person who was literally a white supremacist sitting in the Oval Office.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. You released a statement on Monday along with Senators Tim Scott and Cory Booker that said, quote, that you, quote, continue to make progress toward a compromise and remain optimistic about the prospects of achieving that goal. Optimism that you just expressed at the start of this conversation. But my question is, why weren't you able to meet the goal President Biden set, which was to have the Policing Act signed into law by today?
Honestly, Jonathan, I think we just didn't have enough time. You know, when you do something as significant as this, it involves so many different stakeholders, not just members of the Senate and members of the House. We had been working for months with the Problem Solvers Caucus with Josh Gottheimer and Brian Fitzpatrick over here in the House, and then also in the Senate. And so I think we just literally did not have enough time, but I don't think it's months away. I think that we will be able to get it across the finish line.
And that anticipates the question I was going to ask, and that is, what is the timeline moving forward, and how do you keep momentum from draining away without a clear timeline? Is there concern that negotiations could slip into 2022
No.
when it'll be harder to get anything done? No.
No. I do not believe that at all. I agree with you 100%. If it was to slip into 2022, I do not believe there would be a way to maintain the momentum, and then we'd be an election year. And that's what happened last year. We ran out of time. But I do believe that all of the people that are at the table doing this understand we really have to get this done. I mean, anything could happen. We could have a hurricane, and then all of a sudden, no one is concerned about this issue. I'm worried about the spike in crime and violence that we're seeing becoming an excuse to say, no, we don't need reforms. We need more police. And when in our country are we going to stop doing the same thing over and over and over again? Crime goes by cycles. And every time we have a cycle, we come up with the same solutions. And I have my fingers crossed that this time we will not make that mistake. Let's pass more laws. Let's incarcerate more people. Let's have more police. Let's brutalize communities. That's the way to address crime. So all of that is pressure that we feel to get this job done, because we can't allow a repeat of history.
And just to be clear, that litany that you just recited is part of that negative cycle that you were talking about. Just to be
exactly.
clear.
Yes, exactly.
So how close are you to an agreement? And I'm going to tick off some areas here on chokeholds, the creation of a national database of suspect officers, the imposition of new training standards. I believe one time you and I spoke about this. There is something about the reckless standard versus the reasonable standard. And then we'll get to qualified immunity in a separate question. But how close are you to an agreement?
Well, I won't negotiate on the air, but what I will tell you is that every single one of those issues that you raised are still on the table. They are not off the table. It's not like we have some major disagreements about anything and everything. But, it really is about raising the standards of policing in America. What profession can you tell me that has the power to take away your freedom and take away your life, and wants no transparency, no accountability, no reforms, and wants everybody to accept the way things are? What occupation could you think of like that? So I think professionalizing policing in the United States, we have 18,000 police departments and 18,000 ways of going about policing. That is insane for any type of profession. So it is about raising the standards of the profession. And I believe that that's the most important thing for us to accomplish. But having said that, the day after President Biden signs this bill, there is still so much more that needs to be done. We need to address the root causes of a lot of problems that take place in communities. And because we have spent so many years cutting funding and shredding the safety net, and then when things fall through the cracks, we expect the police to come and pick up the pieces. We need to stop doing that. One of the biggest areas that we need to stop doing that is in the area of mental health. If you look at police shootings, especially those that wind up resulting in a death, many people are in a mental health crisis. Are we really going to accept that in our society, that that's the way we deal with mental health issues? We incarcerate people and then call the police on them, sometimes wind up killing them?
Great question. Congresswoman Bass, let's dive into the biggest issue of them all in these negotiations, and that is on qualified immunity. I would love your thoughts on the compromise that Senator Scott put out there a few weeks ago, and that is on qualified immunity to allow police departments to be sued and not individual police officers. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, at the end of the day, we have got to hold the officers accountable. And again, I would say any other profession, could you imagine if doctors said, no matter what we do, you really should never sue us. You should just trust us. So if I leave the instrument in your body, we'll understand that that's just the part of the profession. That just happens. So we need to accept it. However, if as a patient you took better care of yourself, maybe you wouldn't have come in and maybe you wouldn't have died. So if you think of policing, the policing is basically just saying, you just have to understand that as part of the profession, people might die. And you have to understand that you need to give us the benefit of the doubt, and we should never be sued. We should never be held liable. So I think that policing should be similar to the medical profession or other professions. If you make a mistake, if you violate somebody's civil rights, not just it was an accident, but what we saw in Derek Chauvin, then you need to be held accountable. So it's not just qualified immunity, it's also what you referenced before. It's the fact that officers are so rarely prosecuted because the standard to prosecute an officer is so high. So in changing the profession of policing, like any other profession, you have to be held accountable. Now, there's other things wrong with qualified immunity, I might add, Jonathan, and that is that you have to, if you are going to sue, if you are going to be successful, you have to find another case where an officer violated civil rights in exactly the same way. So let me give you an example. We know that George Floyd was tortured to death over 9 minutes and 39 seconds. A few weeks later, there was a young man in Northern California where the officer did the same thing, but it was 5 minutes on his neck, not 9 minutes. And so for that person to sue, he would have to find another officer that had his knee on his neck for exactly 5 minutes. Things like that need to be changed with qualified immunity. What we have done in the House bill is not get into the particulars. We just reformed it in a way that essentially took it away so that officers can be sued.
And just to be clear, it was 9 minutes and 29 seconds that Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck. But I want to go back to, you talked about the standard being so high in order to hold a police officer accountable. What exactly is that standard? That gets back to the reckless versus reasonable. And I can't remember the term of art, but talk about that.
Sure. Right now, to prosecute an officer, you would essentially have to determine whether it was willful. That was what you were looking for. Willful versus reckless. So did Derek Chauvin do that because he absolutely intended to kill George Floyd, or was he just reckless? So if you go out and you kill somebody in your car, of course it's important whether you intended to kill them, but you could be arrested because you were reckless in how you were driving. And so to have the standard be so high is one of the reasons why communities have been so angry and so frustrated, because they see time after time after time officers not being prosecuted at all. I mean, recently there was a trial in a southern state where the judge just stopped the trial in the middle of the trial, and just said, there's not enough evidence here to continue this trial, and just stopped it. You know, and so that's what communities see over and over and over again, no justice. And that's what we have to change. And I know that there's a lot of pushback from police. Police feel as though they're under attack. There's a lot of police officers that are retiring. There are some departments that have had trouble recruiting. And some people place this and blame reforms and the talk of reforms. I think that's misplaced. I think that, unfortunately, policing is getting a terrible name right now because of the horrific videos that people keep seeing over and over again. The man that was killed in Louisiana who was beat to death, but on the report, the officer said he died in a car accident. If you look at the report that Derek Chauvin filled out, he said George Floyd had a medical incident. Well, the medical incident was that he was choked to death. If that teenager had not been there with the cell phone and the other members of the public that had not been there, George Floyd's death would have just been chalked up to another Black man that died because he had a medical problem. This has to stop in order to restore faith in people that policing is an honorable profession. I hate to see people leaving right now because they feel as though they have no recourse. I believe when the profession, the standards are uplifted, it's professionalized, that this won't happen. But to lay the blame on talk of reforms as the reason why people are leaving the profession, I believe is really misplaced.
And another police shooting of an unarmed black man where the police report differed wildly from the video that came out later was Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina. I want to get your reaction to Minnesota State Attorney General Keith Ellison, who I interviewed here on Friday about all of this. And here's what he had to say about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and a message to you and your fellow negotiators, especially when it comes to qualified immunity. Here's the quote. I want Cory Booker and Karen Bass to fight like hell. I want Tim Scott to go back to his colleagues and say, we've got to pass this even if qualified immunity reform is in it. But don't let the bill die over an item that we can come back for later. What do you say to that? Is a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act with or without qualified immunity, let's say without qualified immunity reform, if it's not in there, is that a bill worth passing?
Well, the bill is really comprehensive. There's a lot of different parts to the bill. I think qualified immunity is essential because one of the most important things for us to do in reforming policing in the United States is to hold police departments and police officers accountable. And qualified immunity and Section 242 that we were just talking about in terms of lowering the standards from willful to reckless are important parts of the bill.
So if you get everything except eliminating qualified immunity, will you ask your colleagues to support the bill?
Well, I'm not prepared to do that. I am not prepared to do that. I think qualified immunity is essential to be in the bill. But as I mentioned, we are looking at the entire bill, all aspects of it, and it is a comprehensive bill. All of it needs to happen. But even when President Biden signs the bill, as I said, there is still so much more that needs to be done. The idea that we would come back and have a bill on qualified immunity makes no sense to me. Unfortunately, just a couple of days ago, the Supreme Court punted on the issue of qualified immunity. And you do know, Jonathan, that qualified immunity is not a law. Qualified immunity was a court decision that has been wreaking havoc in courtrooms around the country for years. And this is something that has needed to be resolved for a very long time. Now is our opportunity to do that.
I'm going to remain optimistic that you and Senator Tim Scott and Senator Cory Booker are going to come together and come out with an agreement at some point before 2022. But once you do, what role would you want President Biden to play in getting that bill passed?
Well, the White House has been very supportive. They have not been directly involved in negotiations and believed that we could manage it on our own, and I believe that that's the case. What I would like to see President Biden do after he signs the bill is to push to make sure that the bill is fully implemented, but then to say, okay, now what's next? What more do we need to do? And I think that President Obama and Vice President Biden laid a great roadmap with the 21st Century Commission on Policing. I'd like to see them convene another commission to, one, look back at those recommendations, because now, that was over 10 years ago, but also to say what more needs to be done. There is fresh momentum for change in our country to look at systemic racism. And anytime you have a president who in his inauguration speech talks about racial equity, white supremacy, and then issues executive orders within the first few days of his administration over racial equity, I think that, again, President Biden could take the lead in saying, okay, this is a good first step. Now, where else do we need to go?
Congressman Bass, take us inside the room, if you will. How often have you and Senator Scott and Booker been meeting?
Well, there hasn't been like a regular schedule. We're in communication with each other a lot, but I would say it's accurate to say a few times a week.
And what are those meetings like? I mean, I know from reporting that I've seen in our paper and elsewhere that these negotiations are actually going very well, that the three of you are working well. Tell us about the working relationship.
Well, I think that's accurate. We have built a solid relationship with each other. We obviously have differences, but it's not contentious. We're not in the room arguing with each other. We're in the room looking at the circumstances that we all face, the political reality, the political conditions, because all of that comes into play. Sometimes, you could believe in and fight for particular policies, then you have to face the political realities. And so all of that is what we're looking at. And at the same time, we're looking at what's happening in our nation. I mean, in a few weeks, we will hear the verdict in the Derek Chauvin case. It was great that he was guilty on all counts, but what's the sentence going to be? Jonathan, we've seen too many times, I would say on the rare occasion when there is a guilty verdict, we've also seen people walk away with a slap on their wrist. We know we're coming to the summer. We know there's an uptick in violence. So all of those conditions weigh into, number one, the absolute urgency and responsibility that I feel, but I believe that my colleagues in the Senate feel the same urgency and responsibility as well.
One more question for inside the tent, and that is, a lot of the news and a lot of the reporting is about how in negotiations between, say, the White House and Republicans on the Hill, that it's all just theater, that Republicans they're not really negotiating. They're not negotiating in good faith. And yet, in listening to you this morning, and again, in reporting that I've seen in the Post and elsewhere, that the negotiations that are happening between you and Senator Booker, Democrats, with Senator Tim Scott, Republican, that the negotiations, really is negotiating in good faith. You all are.
Yes, I don't have any doubt about that on my two Senate colleagues at all. I think, again, Senator Scott faces particular challenges, but I don't for 1 minute believe that he is not negotiating in good faith.
Do you have any fear that what happened to Congressman Katko in the House will befall Senator Tim Scott in the Senate by Minority Leader Mitch McConnell? That being, after being deputized by Leader McConnell to negotiate a bill, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act bill, out of the Senate, that once it comes out, Leader McConnell will basically cut Senator Scott off at the knees.
I mean, honestly, I don't know, but it would just be very hard for me to imagine that they would do that to him. One thing about Senator Scott has his own history with dealing with police, just like everybody that I know does. And this is often said that this is a gender issue, but you talk to Black women, myself included, we have our own histories with policing. And at the end of the day, as Senator Scott says, I'm conservative, I'm a Republican, but I'm a Black man, and I've been stopped numerous times. He was stopped recently here near the Capitol wearing his Senate pin, and he was pulled over and asked to show his driver's license. So, he has his own experiences, and I know that he has expressed those within his caucus. And for the only Black Republican in the Senate, for them to do that, what can I say?
Mm-hmm. And Senator Scott has spoken powerfully from the Senate floor about his experiences as a Black man growing up, but also as a Black senator in the encounters he had with, say, Capitol Police, where one said to him, "I recognize the pin, but I don't recognize you," and he had been there for 5 years already. I want to pick up on something that you just talked about, and that is, a lot of focus is on Black men, but Black women also have their experiences with police. The case of Breonna Taylor brought that to the fore horrifically. Why do you think that what happens to Black women at the hands of law enforcement doesn't get as much attention?
Well, I think that women in the criminal justice system, period, do not get the same attention. So we're in this moment in our history, which I'm very excited about, where we are examining criminal justice reform, but you never hear women talked about and you never hear children talked about. It's basically a male issue. But the reality is that it is a issue that has impacted Black women as well. There are Black women that have been killed, Black women that have been beat, harassed, etc. And it just doesn't get the same coverage, which is why a UCLA professor started a project called Say Her Name, because you remember the names of the men, but not so much the women. After she started that project, though, people now are more accustomed to remembering the names of the women as well. But what you described is consistent with the entire criminal justice system.
We got about 5 minutes left, and I got to squeeze in two questions that are probably require lengthy answers. You were in Los Angeles during the beating of Rodney King in 1991. That was the first time citizen video figured prominently in a case of police brutality. Citizen video obviously proved vital in the case of Derek Chauvin and the murder of George Floyd. How has citizen video changed the conversation on accountability or outcomes with police?
It's changed everything. I mean, March 3rd, 1991, I actually thought that was going to be it, that what we had been fighting about for generations, the public would finally have to believe what we had been saying for so many years. That was how many years ago? You know, when we passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act this year, it was on the anniversary. It has made all the difference in the world. Black America, Latino America has always known this. It has taken numerous videos for white America to begin to say, maybe there's a problem.
And yet the burst of support that there was a year ago seems to be waning. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that is because that is what happens in our country with time. But I also think all of the misinformation on particular networks that have basically lied about what happened over the protests, you know that majority of the protests were peaceful. They've only focused in on the ones where there was looting and rioting. And so that, and then they have demonized the Black Lives Matter movement, even some people trying to say that's who was involved in January 6th. I guess it was, you know, Black people in whiteface. I'm not really sure. So the demonization of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, contributed to that. But you know, I mean, we continue to see videotape after videotape after videotape, and after a while, I think people get numb by it, which is why it's so important that we stay the course. We can't just respond with policy when there is tremendous momentum. We have to respond regardless.
And final question to you, and that is this: in a little while, I think in less than a couple of hours, you are going to be meeting with the family of George Floyd. They're here in Washington for the meeting at the White House. You've met them once before, and I think you met the brother, Philonise Floyd, a while back. But in this reunion that you're about to happen, what message do you want to give to them, and what are you hoping to hear from them?
Well, I'm hoping the message to give to them is a message of hope. I want them to know that we are absolutely committed. We didn't get it done on a particular date, but we will get it done. So I want to express that to them. And then I want them to, or I want to hear from them about how they are feeling, whether or not they have lost hope. Is there more they want to see us do? I think those are the things. You know, it's always difficult to meet with families who've experienced such a tragic loss. And I know that this morning will be difficult as well.
Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, thank you very, very much for coming back to Washington Post Live.
Thanks for having me on, Jonathan.
And as always, thank you for joining us. The next installment of our Race in America series will be Thursday at 1:30 p.m. when my colleague Michelle Norris talks with filmmaker Barry Jenkins about his powerful new series, The Underground Railroad. Once again, I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for The Washington Post. Thank you very much for tuning in to Washington Post Live.